Welcome to those of you who have joined. I see Sarah, Amy, Ann, Valerie, Betty, Miriam, and Brian currently. My name is Andy Hennig, and I'll introduce myself here in a minute. Please feel free to leave your video on or off, as is your preference, and leave yourself on mute. Given the fact that we don't have a huge group, I think Shauna said that she would be willing to take questions in and among the discussion here today. If we have a little bit too much, or if I need to kind of, I'm acting as the moderator here today, so if you want to instead ask a question via the Zoom group chat, please put it in there, and I will get that in at the appropriate time. Good morning, Lila. And I guess I'll start with the introduction. So this is the session titled 6 Core and Easy Skills for Digital Accessibility. Our presenter is Shauna Crossan. She is from the University of Minnesota College of Liberal Arts Career Services. And my name is Andy Hennig. I'll be moderating the session, as I said. I've been involved with Best Prep for about 20 years as a volunteer, as an e-mentor, as a resident business leader, a job shadow partner for the Technology Integration Workshop, and I've also been on the board of directors for about the past 16 years. So Best Prep is a wonderful organization, as I'm sure you're all finding out if this is your first experience with them, but I have loved participating with them for a long time. As I said, today our presenter is Shauna Crossan from the University of Minnesota College of Liberal Arts Career Services. If you have questions for Shauna or comments about the session, please put them in the text box, the chat box. I'll be checking that throughout the session. When you're asking a question, please make sure that you include your name and your school or organization that you're with. As a reminder, this session is being recorded, and it will be available for play, pause, and rewind at your own speed, probably beginning tomorrow. You can check to see the recorded sessions maybe later today or tomorrow morning, and you will be able to access this content for 1 year from today. So a background, Shauna is a former teacher and museum professional. She led the Minnesota Historical Society's efforts of digital delivery and historical content for the K-12 audience for 10 years. She's now an academic technologist at the University of Minnesota, working with faculty to integrate digital content and tools into instruction and research, focusing on geographic information systems and digital humanities. Building accessible digital content is inherent in all her work. So with that, welcome Shauna, and please feel free to start your presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Andy. Appreciate all that, I guess, all that those nice words. And it was nice to hear that you've had such a long history with Best Prep. We didn't have time to talk about that. So this is maybe my 4th or 5th year presenting at Best Prep for this conference. And certainly this is our first year doing it digitally. So I'm sure this has been an adventure for everybody, as has a lot of things since March. So again, thank you so much for having me here. And thank you for choosing this session. I'm really grateful that you're here. This topic of digital accessibility is really, really important to me. And it's something I think we don't talk enough about. That said, I want to say, if as we go through this session, you're finding that this isn't meeting your needs, isn't something you're interested in, isn't something that you need for your job or for your day, and there's something else you want to go do, I will not be at all offended if you leave and go to another session. I understand there's a lot of options here today and a lot to get in. So again, if you need to leave, I am not at all offended. And I would love it if everybody would take just a second and put I can see your name when you put in, but just put what you teach and where you teach and what grade you're in as well. We could do a little, I plan to have all these polls ready for today, but it's been a little bit busy the last few weeks getting faculty ready to teach online. So that has been an adventure. So would love to just hear in the chat where you're from. It'll just help me get a sense of if you're all elementary teachers or high school teachers or where you're at. I want to just get started here. We're going to talk a little bit about what it means to be accessible. Okay, like I said, I'm doing this with not with my normal set of okay, now let's see. There we go. Now you should be able to see what I'm talking about, right? Okay. So thank you so much for filling this out. Very helpful. Speech pathologist, interesting. I'd love to hear from you, some of your thoughts, Amy. Fourth grade, awesome. Okay, so thank you so much for this. I want to just go through this and ask a few questions about what digital accessibility is. And I have one other thing. I'm going to see if we can try this. I'm going to put a link in here. And if you're able to go into that link, and we're going to talk a little bit about who accessibility is useful for. Like, what do we, oh, hold on, I got to turn this on. Open all. I've never tried, we're going to try this. We'll see how this works. Who benefits from making digital content accessible? Maybe we'll just, let's think about that for a minute, and then we'll go back to the sharing. Okay, this is really quite hard to do with my small screen. So today, here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about accessible thinking. What is accessibility? What do I mean when I'm talking about accessibility? Who are we addressing, and whose needs are we, or who are we benefiting when we make content accessible? We're going to look at 6 core skills and demonstrate those 6 core skills. And really, this needs to be a discussion along the way. So I'm very open to that. And we're going to talk a little, I don't think we're going to get to the students and the 6 core skills. I'm thinking we'll skip that part. So what is accessibility? What do I mean when I'm talking about accessibility? Sorry, this is really hard when I don't have access to all my screens. Making digital content more accessible to people with disabilities. The WCAG is a guideline that's for people building websites. It fits, you know, that the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the 30th anniversary of that was this weekend. And the WCAG kind of comes out of that there's digital accessibility as well as physical accessibility. So this is the guideline, making digital content more accessible to people with disabilities. That's fine. I really like to think about it that we're making digital content more accessible. When we talk about people with disabilities, both in K-12, you do have students that are identified that have IEPs or 504s. At the university level, we lose that. Students no longer have that protection, but they do have they can access a different type of protection. But I would say both of our audiences, both higher ed and in K-12, you have students who, especially in K-12, you have students who don't realize that they have something that making things accessible would be beneficial for. Students don't, and in higher ed, we really talk about students should not have to self-identify with a disability. There's no reason a professor needs to know that a student has dyslexia. That's just not any of their business. And we don't want students to have to identify if they don't need to. And besides, beyond students with a disability, making digital content accessible is really beneficial for everybody. We're going to talk about that for a little bit. And this is a long piece in here, and we won't go through this, but I like to call out where it says it's treating everybody the same, giving everybody the same opportunity, no matter what their ability or circumstance. You know, the ADA, it says we never want to exclude someone from a physical building because they're in a wheelchair. And now the ADA means that they have to have a ramp. They have to have something to make them in there. We don't want to exclude students from our content, the digital content. And in this world when so much is digital and online, even pre-COVID, we were doing a lot more with digital, but certainly right now, you may all be teaching online again. We did that in the spring. It was not fun for any of us, I don't think. But we need to think about this even more than we used to. So some of you have seen a variety of different manifestations of this concept of equality, accommodation, and accessibility. And I think there are some problems with all of these, and so I don't want you to take this as whatever. This is an illustration. It's not the absolute. Equality is when the board is at one spot, everybody is in the same place. Accommodation, we're giving one student a ramp, and we're giving another student a box to stand on. But accessibility, let's just put it where everybody can access it. Let's just do that from the start. It seems like that might be hard, but once you learn how to do some of these basic things, it really isn't overwhelming. And once you learn how to incorporate this in your workflow, it isn't any more difficult. So let's talk about who we mean when we talk about people with disabilities. A lot of times it's them, the blind people or the deaf people, and us, the rest of us who don't have a disability. That is really not the case. A language learner, someone for whom English is not their first language, benefits from this type of making things accessible. A student who is anxious, the more we can make things clear and straightforward, benefits students with anxiety. This is really beneficial for students with cognitive disabilities as well. Someone who's healing from a bike accident. Right now, I am having a ton of wrist issues because I'm not in my ergonomics setting that I had at work. My home setting is just not as good. So I'm really having to be careful. I'm trying to find ways around my normal way of interacting with digital content because I didn't have a bike accident, but I was just working with a faculty member who broke her leg and hurt her arm. So the way she's interacting with her content is very different now. Students who are distracted. Aren't we all distracted and stressed right now? So a student who is colorblind. You don't necessarily know that, and that is a key thing to think about when we're building content. You're all in front. Older. Some of us, older people, these, if I don't have my glasses, I take them off, I can't see a thing. And that is a form of a way that we can build these things around to make it accessible for everybody. Students who are on a bus. Was just talking with some students last week about how they do a lot of their homework on the bus to and from school. And if their videos don't have captions, they're not able to do that work. So it's really important. So in essence, making content accessible is not just helpful for the blind and deaf student, but it's helpful for everybody. It really goes back to that concept of universal design for learning. So it's everybody. Come on, let's go for it. This is a nice chart that I got at a conference last summer that I really liked. It laid it out really well. We can have permanent disabilities, a student who is blind, a student who is deaf, or someone who only has one arm. There are temporary disabilities, such as when a student or a parent or someone has an arm injury. Maybe you have an ear infection and you can't hear right now, or you've lost your voice due to laryngitis. Then there's situational ones. Of course, we're not going to have any new parents. Betty has a daughter who is not a new parent, but has an additional child. So that's kind of fun. But if you're, the example that they use for this is if you're a parent and you're walking around with a baby in one arm, you don't have two hands to do something with. So you might have to navigate a little differently. Again, we also hope that none of our students are distracted drivers or bartending, but all of these, you can think of how this might apply, that we might have a situational thing. Let's say a student is at home learning in an online setting, and they have their brother is in the next room. So there's a lot of noise coming at the student. And so having things like captions is extremely important for that student to be able to focus and learn from that content. We have speakers who might have an accent. I don't like that term, heavy accent, but who might have an accent that makes it difficult to understand. And so having captions on that is really important. Language learners, again, same thing. So let's talk about accessibility and usability. We talked about what accessibility means. It's just that everybody can access this. Usability and accessibility tie together. If something is accessible, that also means that it's usable, and usability and accessibility tie very much together. So I may use those words interchangeably, and it's really about best practices for building digital content. And I know a lot of you probably build digital content in your learning management system. I think that's actually my slide up here. Well, we're gonna skip that. We're gonna talk about that in a second. You're never gonna get 100% accessibility. Different people have different needs. And so what we do is we try to do our very best. And I'm gonna talk about a few of these steps that you can do. And we're just gonna, maybe at the end, you're gonna pick one thing that you're gonna work on. But just doing these little things can really improve the accessibility for everybody. Some of the things you're already doing, not using acronyms unless you've already defined it, not using jargon. These are all different things. Spelling out abbreviations, using spell check. This is what I wanted to get to. Where do you think you need to use digital accessibility best practices? Where do you build digital content in your work? Feel free to pop those ideas in the chat. Some of you, I'm sure many of you use some sort of a learning management system if you're using Schoology or Canvas. Where else do you think you might be using digital accessibility skills? How many of you use Google Docs with your students? Building Google Docs for students is a place where you can use digital accessibility skills. How many of you might send an email home to parents? That's another place where you'll use digital accessibility skills. Posting content for students, whether it's a video, whether it's some sort of a reading. If it's you know, at the university level, we do a lot with PDFs of journal articles. So we need to make sure that those PDFs are accessible. That's really important. So students, and so PDFs of journal articles need to be accessible not only for a student who uses a screen reader. It is likely in K-12, you know if students are using screen readers, but I bet you have students who aren't telling you, but who are using the digital tools to read something to them. And they might not be telling you that. So it's important that any content you use is accessible to that type of thing. All right. So here's some ideas about places you might be doing. If you're making PowerPoints or Google presentations for students and posting them, that's also a place that you want to make sure is accessible. Okay, we're going to keep going. I talked about that. Okay, 6 core skills. This is what we're here for. And now I have 25 minutes to get through these. Headings. Headings are really important for visual structure of our content, as well as, and they are absolutely essential for any student using a screen reader or other assistive technology. Both screen readers and tools that allow students to navigate without a mouse. If you have students who can't use their hands or broken arm, if they're using different types of navigation, those also use headings. Interesting that Schoology is tough for the organizational aspect. Brian, I'm really curious about that. Is it that it's it's at a different level that makes it hard for them to find things? And so making something accessible in terms of digital accessibility is really important. And that goes back to universal design and designing things so it's easy for students to find. So let's look at how headings work with this. And I'm not sure how headings work in Schoology. I'm sure you have them. So headings are set up just like an outline. We always start with an H1. So if you're doing a web page or a Canvas page, if any of you use Canvas, the title of that page will have an H1. And then as you put the content down, you want to use these header 2, header 3, just like in an outline that you would do. Make sure you don't switch those up, because a screen reader or assistive technology will always look for headers in order. So you want to make sure they're always used in order. I do have a document. Let's see if this is where I want to go. Yep, I'm going to go there to this document. I do have a document where I show a little bit about headers. And we can look on a web page. I could go find this web page and show you. So right now this looks like a header because I have the title of the page, it looks bigger and it's bold. But in reality, you can tell by putting your mouse in your cursor. If any of you use Google Docs, how many of you use Google Docs? Feel free just to raise your hands, or yeah, a lot of you, good. Okay, so in Google Docs, have you ever used these headers before? Do you know what they are? What headers are? Headers are really important. It's going to make your life easier, I promise. So let's say I've got this content. I know that this is just actually normal text. I can tell that up here, the style is just normal text. So that's just normal paragraph text. But what I've done to this is I've highlighted it and I've made it larger so I can change the font, and I could maybe make it a color. What did we talk about? One of the really important things that we want to be careful about is color blindness. So if you are using color, you never want color to be the only indication of a meaning. So be careful when you're using color. I know sometimes it makes things more fun and engaging, but just be thoughtful about what kind of colors you use. So that's okay, but really then you have to remember every time you're going to do that level of header, you have to do the exact same thing. It's much easier for you and it's much better for the students to use this heading 1. Now, Google already has a style built into the heading 1, so but you could change that style by going in here and update. You could change that style. Let's say I don't like this font. I'm going to go back to something that's a little more. So I want to use that font instead. I can update heading 1 to match that. So next time I go in and do heading 1, it's going to look just like that. So here's fine. I've got normal text. That's a paragraph. And remember, this isn't really, well, this is part of accessibility. Remember when we read online, and especially if you're doing Schoology or any of these LMSs, when we read online, we can't read as fast as we read when we're reading a print book. So when you're building content online, try and break your paragraphs into smaller chunks. You might lose that sort of sense, like this chunk right here is too long of a paragraph. Our eyes really have a hard time processing information in that size of a paragraph. So what I would do in this case is I would find a logical place. I'm not going to read this right now. I would find a logical place and I would just break that into 2 paragraphs so that it's easier for our eyes to read. There've been a lot of studies. I did website development for a long time. Our eyes really can only handle about 5 lines at a time. So even this is probably a little long. I might make that even shorter. Okay, I'm diverging from my headers. So I've got this as a header 1. This is a header 2, because that's the second level of information here. Right now I can see this is a normal text up here. I'm going to turn that into a header 2, heading 2. It's going to go right there. Again, I don't like that style at all. It's really hard to read. So I'm going to highlight it. I don't like impact. I'm going to go to Cambria perhaps. And now I'm going to change that header to style. You know, you don't have to do that if you're just using a generic. I've messed with this document so it's all goofy, but you can make it choose what your style you want it to look like. So I made that into a header 2. The next place I want to use a header 2 is in right here. So all I have to do in this case, all I have to do is have my cursor in the line and I go click header 2, heading 2, and boom, you can see it looks exactly the same. And I don't have to remember what size and what style I made that header 2 earlier on. Here's a header 3, but I can tell this is just normal text. I want to make that header 3. You see how that's organized? And so visually, this helps us read. And again, that goes to this whole thing about the paragraphs being too long. When we're looking visually online, we look from header to header to header in order to organize the content in our brain. So the more consistent it can be visually, the more helpful it is for students with cognitive disabilities, for anybody, and I would probably for your 4th and 5th graders as well, just to make your content as consistent as you can is important. It is absolutely crucial for any student who's using an assistive technology that these headers be in here. The technology reads that code behind the scenes. When I put in the header 1 here, it actually writes an H1 and an H2, and the technology can read that behind the scenes. Okay. Any questions on that? We've got a lot. I could spend a lot of time on this, but we have a lot more to do. Formatted lists. Please, again, jump in with chat. Tell me if I'm boring and this isn't important. We can talk about other things. But I want to talk about bulleted lists. A lot of times when we put in different types of content, so here's our list item 2, list item 3. Lists are really important. Anytime you're putting more than probably 3 things in a, if you have 3 commas or 3 things, try putting it in a list instead. Again, organizes content for students with cognitive disabilities, ADHD, dyslexia, any of those types of disabilities or issues. It organizes it for anybody to visually see. You can see, and I have a slide later on that I'll show this. But you can see things in this list much easier than you can see if it's in a long running paragraph or sentence. It's much easier to see this way. One thing that, and I can't demo this with a Google Doc because Google Doc thankfully will automatically put in these bulleted lists up here. If you see the numbered list, I could change that to a numbered list. And you have a lot of different options. Or a bulleted list, I can do that and make it a bunch of different options. And it gets the same sort of thing. Part A, part 2, whatever. So always use the built-in tools in your software to create these bulleted lists. It's the same thing I talked about with the headings, is it writes some code in the back end that you can't see. But the assistive technology can see it. So use these bulleted lists that's built in. So in Google, for example, if I put a dash to illustrate my first part, it's automatically going to include that in a bulleted list, which is great. And I love that about Google Docs. But not all technology will do that. So just use this one that's already built in. Good. So a lot of, family emails, great response about how we're going to use digital accessibility. Okay. Any questions on the bulleted list? I think that's a formatted list. I think that's a pretty easy one. Here's just some guidelines, 3 or more in a row. Keep it short. Again, I'm going to go back to keeping things short when we're writing in digital. It's really hard to see. lot of words. So just cut back what you're writing. Give it white space, and that's part of a list. Or unordered is when the order doesn't matter. Ordered, of course, 1, 2, 3 is when you need some sort of an order. Hyperlinks, this is one of my favorite ones to talk about. We're going to talk about the anatomy of a hyperlink. We all know what a hyperlink is, right? You click on it, it takes you somewhere. So we all know what's a hyperlink. Usually we have standards to indicate a hyperlink. It's underlined and it's usually blue. You'll notice there's two ways of indicating meaning there, the underline and the blue, because we never want color to be the only indication of meaning. I do like you to avoid italics. Sometimes people use italics to indicate things. Italics are very hard on our eyes on a digital platform, so we'd like to avoid italics as much as possible. One thing, when you're doing a hyperlink, make sure that it's embedded in a word. And this goes for screen readers, it's absolutely essential. It also goes for visual. You want the link embedded into something instead of out. It needs to be descriptive of where you're going. If I say anatomy of a hyperlink, I know that I'm going to find something about hyperlink if I click on that link. So it starts with a keyword, again, so you know where you're going. This is not an embedded link. Google Docs have really long and ugly links. Some websites have shorter links, so it's better. But if you came across this on a page, I have Canvas pages, I work with faculty, and they will just put this link out there and it says HTTP, we don't know what that means. You don't know where that link is going. So for the visual reader, they don't know where that's going and they're confused. It takes up a lot of space. Remember, we've talked about we can't see as much when we're using online, so you want to shorten it. So this just takes up a lot of extra space. And for a student who is using a screen reader, this is excruciating because the screen reader will read all of this to them. It'll say link, and then it'll say it'll read this whole thing. It's excruciating. So just don't do it. Okay, even if you don't think you have anybody using a screen reader, if you're sending materials home for a parent, you don't know if a parent's using a screen reader. So, and the students are using some of those built-in tools to read things to them, like built into any Mac or iPads, any of those text readers, it'll also read that to them. So you really want to avoid typing it out. It's really ugly. Okay, so here's an example. This is descriptive. You know where you're going before you click on that. This link is going to take you to the worksheet on where the red fern grows. It's very descriptive. It starts with a keyword. I would flip this around and put the worksheet first, or wherever it goes, something that you know. Okay, this is an example, interactive pie quiz. Is this I'm gonna give you a hint. No, this is not. Is this a good way to write out the link? Click here for instructions on making pie. This is a really common way of writing a link because we say that while we're talking. Click here to find the instructions on the pie. The words click here are absolutely not necessary and they're a waste of space. First of all, we know it's a link because it's got the blue and the underline. So if something else is blue and underlined, you know it's a link. Click here is just extra words that you don't need. And it doesn't give you any context of where you're going. For a screen reader, screen readers often will navigate web pages and digital content by going from link to link. It's a way of getting a sense of what's there. This would say to a screen reader, link, click here. And it doesn't give them any sense of where they're going. Is this a better option? Maybe, but you still got extra words. You really don't need the click here for instructions. You really don't need that. This one, at least the click here isn't linked, but you don't need the words click here. This is a better way of writing it. Pie making instructions. You know exactly where you're going. It's a lot less terms and words. The indication here is that it's going to open in a new tab. That is important for students with screen readers because they know that they're going to go off to a new tab and they can't just click the back button. So does that embedding make sense? Embedding the hyperlinks make sense? And avoiding the click here. This is my favorite slide. I did web editing at the Minnesota Historical Society for a long time, and this was kind of my mantra. Don't ever use these words in your content. Again, we already have indicators, the underline and the blue, and then how you write the link. I bet anytime you click here, we can rewrite the sentence so you don't need it. Okay, we'll stop spending time on that. I often do an exercise here to rewrite them, but I think we'll skip that today. I want to show an example of an email and how we're going to rewrite an email using best practices for digital accessibility. So this might look like a normal email that you'd send out to your families about reminding them about our field trip. Couple things going on here. And if we had more time, I would spend time on this, but we don't. Couple things I'm going to point out. Click here. Don't do that. We also have this form link here. So there's some easy ways that we can change this. You also notice that we have a long list here. So if you look at this and think about how this is readable, let's go to this slide. Look at the difference there between how readable that is and how readable this is. I would argue this you can look at in a glance and get that information, whereas this one takes a lot of work to get the information out of it. So this is how to write more accessibly. Okay, thoughts, questions? I'm just going to keep going. Color and contrast is really important. We've talked about that a little bit. You want to make sure that you have contrast, and a lot of people love using color. Just think about your students with color blindness. They might not even know it, and they might not tell you, partly because they may not know. So always use bright and dark. Avoid rainbows, please avoid rainbows. This is impossible to read. And I know we like to put color on digital things to make it pretty. It is impossible to read. Look how hard that yellow is. Impossible. You cannot see it. Red and green are very common color blindness colors, blue. So just avoid that as much as you can. If you're good, no, I'm not even going to say if you're going to use it, do it on a black background. Just don't use it. WebAIM is a great resource if you want to do work on color contrast. I will say you're always safe with black and white. Either white on black or black on white is always going to be safe. I know it's not very exciting, but I bet there's other ways we can make our content exciting. We all, in slides, we love to use images. You can't read that text. And that's really important that a student with disabilities be able to read that text. One simple way of doing that is just to add a highlight box behind the text so that you can see it in contrast over the image. This is just one example of using different tools and tricks to make sure that there's contrast. We're going to talk a little bit about how to emphasize words. Again, this is color and contrast. So if you have the sentence, I need to emphasize these 3 words. You could turn it red, but what do we talk about with color, and color being the only indicator? A student who's colorblind might not see that. You could make it bold, and that at least gives us a bold and a color of an indicator. The same would go for like italics, but again, remember italics are really hard to read. You could make it bigger, so that has 3 ways of indicating that's different, so that works. But I would argue maybe all you need is that. Instead of adding that whole sentence, maybe you just include these the words that are important. Again, digital accessibility and writing and being organized all go hand in hand. It's that usability and accessibility. Okay, I have a couple more things I really want to get to. Yeah, don't use underlines because that means hyperlink, remember? Italics, too hard to read. Alt text is really important for students who use a screen reader. Alt text is text that goes behind an image. And in Google Docs, it's really easy to add. So if I'm going to upload an image, uploading an image, I should have done this already because I don't have one. So I'm not going to waste time because we're getting a little bit tight on time. But in Google, whenever you have an image, like on here, if I write, well, I can't because I'm in presenter mode. You can do it either in presentation or in a Google Doc, where you right click on the image and it gives you a space to write alt text. Alternative text is what goes in if a student is not able to see the image. This is not as much an issue for bandwidth now as it used to be, but it was really important back when we didn't have high speed internet and images often wouldn't download. That the alt text gives you the replacement for the visual that's in there. If you don't have a reason to have that visual in there, really think about whether it needs to be there, because especially for students with for disabilities and cognitive disabilities, it's just a distraction. Lila posted something about a highlight box. I agree with you about not using the background image. It's very distracting, and it really needs to add, something to it. The highlight box works if you need to have the image, but if you're going to put text and an image in a presentation, sometimes having them separate is a really good idea. But that's a really good point, because the background images for students with cognitive disabilities can be really distracting. Okay, alt text. Again, this walks you through how to put alt text in a Google image, and these slides will be available. I should put a link to them right now in here. I will do that. And Zoom violates every bit of this chat violates every bit of my good sense. It makes me insane, just drives me crazy, because you can't embed the link. Remember, I just got through talking about embedding a link, and when you post things in the chat in Zoom, you can't embed the link. It makes me crazy. So when you're writing an alt text, ask yourself, what do you want to know? Why are you putting that text in there or that picture in there? What do students need to know? And again, this is going to go through a whole bunch of stuff, but I really want to get to this one other concept, my last concept. So I'm going to leave this. We can talk about it if we have time. One exercise I like to do, and we're not going to do it here, is when I teach alt text, is I have you close your eyes and I read alternative text to you for an image. And when I read that alt text, you need to visualize what the image is. And it gets you in that sense of, okay, what do I need to describe and what do I need to say about that image so students understand why it's there. So here's one example. A late stage monarch caterpillar heading back down a world milkweed stem. The thin plant bent nearly horizontally by the weight of the large caterpillar, large insect. See, so that gives you a visual of why it's there. Okay, there's the picture that this was used from. Normally I do writing practice. We don't have time. Alt text can depend on the context as well. So in this case, if this photo, this is an image of Split Rock Lighthouse, depending on where this website is or how you're using it, the alt text might be different. Okay, this is the last thing, and I should put this early in the presentation. Video captions are so important. It is absolutely crucial that any videos you use have captions. YouTube provides, at the university we have tools that provide auto captions. YouTube does the same. So if you put things in YouTube, you can, it does generate auto captions. They're not 100%. So if you have students who have a 504 and IEP for hearing loss, those won't be adequate. But you can go in and correct captions in YouTube and make sure they're correct. YouTube captions are about 92 or 93%. Thank you, Andy. And I wanted to leave questions. So I just did a usability test with a group of students at the university testing our mobile app. And part of the test we did was seeing if students could figure out how to turn on the captions. And we asked these 8 students, we asked if they use captions on videos, and these are undergrads, but I would argue it's probably not any different for your students. If they use captions on videos, 7 of the 8 of them said all the time. Captions are something they use all the time. Language learners, if you're on a bus, so many reasons. So, okay, I have babbled for far too long. Are there questions, comments, discussion points, things that didn't make sense, things that you don't agree with, things you can't use?
Since we're not a huge group, if you would like to unmute, please go ahead.
Or is there one thing out of these 6 that you think you could try? Which of these 6 sound the easiest to do, or will be something to do? Miriam, you're muted.
So sorry, I'll show me video too. So I'm a click here person, guilty. So I can easily take that out and just rechange the way that I format those sentences and Also, I underline things too, so I think that just making sure that I remember that underlining is only for hyperlinks. I think that would help streamline emails to parents and stuff.
That'll make a big difference. And I'm sorry if I'm a little harsh about the click here. It's just one of those things for me. So thank you for sharing, Valerie. Miriam. I'm going to unmute you.
Am I now correctly?
You're good.
Can you hear me? Okay. My thing is showing opposite of what I am. You know, we're at Central High School in St. Paul. They're doing the IB, or the MYP for all. And I've just been there for the last year, but my biggest concern has been actually all the things that you have highlighted, because the communications in IB do absolutely everything that you say we shouldn't do. And acronym after acronym, you'll have one page of communication that has 22 acronyms on it. And it's impossible for people to understand. It definitely feels like a sorority or a fraternity that only certain people are welcome. And so I just really appreciate this. And I've really asked that, you know, when they're communicating, that it makes sense to everyone who would look at it. This is, I think, just kind of something that I can point toward to say it's not helpful. This is not helpful to anyone.
And I think that's an accessibility issue for students with disabilities, but oh my gosh, is that an equity issue? If it's going to parents, it's what an exclusionary thing. It's absolutely, yeah. Good, thank you for sharing that.
I've done a lot of team teaching with special education teachers, and it's just fascinating watching them take one of my documents and make it readable. You know, I never thought about it before. It would be big blocks of text, and they would split it up and create space and headers, and I learned a lot. But I was wondering, I've done a lot of movies. I had to do all of those platforms offer captions? I've never thought about captions.
What platforms do you use?
I don't know. It's really simple. It's like, it's not even iMovie. It's a very basic one. You can't edit. You just got to be ready to go and talk.
So do you have students create movies?
I have, but they had a bunch of speeches they needed to do when we went to distance learning. And they just did them on their phone, and the quality was all over the map.
Yeah. And there's only so much you can do with that. I would bet most of them, and the last 4 or 5 months, really all I've been able to do is immerse myself in what's happening at the university. So we're very lucky at the U that we have tools that we can add those auto captions. I would be cautious with having students upload to YouTube. You got to think about that.
Yeah.
iMovie, I would guarantee iMovie has a way to upload transcripts very easily.
Okay.
Transcripts that would go into captions. Some of the other tools off the phone, that's a really good question, Tim, and I don't know. I'm going to look into that.
That's something I never thought of, so I really appreciate that you brought it up. Yeah.
Captions are huge.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Well, we are at time. If there's any last question for Shauna, please feel free to ask it here quickly. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. I hope that you had a good session. Good to see some of the comments here coming in through the chat about how these are practical. These are easy things that we can do, things that now that we're aware, we can help in communication. I know as a business professional, I make most of these mistakes, and I'm going to be more cognizant with what I do. So appreciate your time, Shauna, and I appreciate everybody else here. And hope that you all have a wonderful experience here with the rest of the technology integration workshop from Best Prep here this week.
I just want to say quick thank you, Amy, for your comment. I think you're absolutely right. When I dump all this on you at once, it feels like a lot, but once you get things in that workflow, like making headers. That actually makes your life easier. So once you learn how to do that, it makes things easier. So.
And I never knew what that meant before, so I've never done that. So
Yeah.
just easy.
Yep, it's easy to do. I just want to thank you all so much for being here today. It really means a lot to me that you would spend your time learning how to do accessibility, and your students are lucky to have you. I wish you all the best in the fall. I know we're all heading into chaos, so.
Wondering what it's going to be.
Enjoy your time up north.
Yeah, thank you. Feel free to send me an email. My email's on that presentation, and I think the best prep people have it as well. So I'm happy to answer questions. So thank you again. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you. Thank you, Shauna. Thank you, everyone. Have a good